And did anyone sign up for something with a different title, like how does the system of machine learning impact enterprise architecture? No? That means you guys all signed up at the last minute, because it used to be called that like maybe a month ago. So thank you. Speak a little louder? Okay. So thanks everyone for joining. For those of you who are new to system of machine learning or don't know what it is, we'll go over that. What is the system of machine learning? And then Cliff here is from Cisco, is actually going to share a real story from a real customer on how the system of machine learning has come to life or is about to come to life for him at Cisco, okay, and the journey that it took to get there. So I'm going to first share the system of machine learning, what that is, what that means, what we think the journey is. I'm part of the Inspire program. I'm David Kwok. And what I'm here to do is kind of share with you what does system machine learning do and how it fits into the larger enterprise architecture story. So that's kind of the goal of this first 10 minutes. And then Cliff's going to give that backstory. So what we're going to go over is, what is the groundwork? What does it take to make that system of machine learning come to life? We're going to go over how does that impact enterprise architecture? How does that fit in with other platforms? A lot of you, how many of you guys are enterprise architects? All right, so for the enterprise architects in the room, a lot of enterprise architects always ask, well, how does ServiceNow fit into my ecosystem? SAP, MuleSoft, all these other platforms that say they also have a system of engagement, a system of action, a system of insight, and a system of record. So we'll talk about that. And then ultimately, we're going to open it up to say what's the art of the possible, what's reality, and ultimately some questions around how you can get there. I hand it over to Cliff real quick to do his introduction.
Thank you. I am Cliff Dienhart. I'm the senior architect in charge of our ServiceNow implementation in IT, as well as service assurance, asset management, and a few other areas. So we've been working with ServiceNow for about 2 years on our implementation, which we got up and live in production about 8 or 9 months ago, and are working now toward machine learning and assurance, as David said.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Cliff. One other person to introduce is Jake Berman. Jake is a product manager who has helped us tremendously ensure that his journey matches what the marketing roadmap is and make it reality. So Jake was going to attend here. I'm not sure if he's actually in the room and I just can't see him, but he's also a key member of this team that put this presentation together. So what will you learn? What you're going to learn is the key elements of the system of machine learning. You're going to cover what the impact is, what is the impact to enterprise architecture, and then ultimately some building blocks around what does it take to actually go down that journey. So a lot of people ask, why is machine learning important today? The key reason it's important is because most organizations are going through this transformation of there's rising expectations, there's more data, but ultimately less time and less resources to provide that solution, right? So the old adage in IT and across the enterprise is do more with less, right? And more importantly, you want to eliminate some of the work that is repetitive, right? I was working with a customer that had looked at the system of machine learning and said, well, how can it help me? And the first thing we had to do was figure out what they spend the most time on, right? And what we found was they spend the most amount of time on password reset. So 80% of their tickets to their service desk was password reset. So guess what? The perfect use case for the system of machine learning is exactly that. Let's eliminate 80% of those calls, deflect them to a machine, to a chatbot to go solve them. So there's 6 key areas that we focus on at ServiceNow from what is the system of machine learning, right? When we think of the system of machine learning, we're talking about 6 things. The ability to task, route, and log events. So for example, I've got a ticket, it comes into level 1. How do I get that to the right level 2 and level 3 analysts without it ping-ponging across the environment? When it comes to correlation, what does it take to correlate events and ultimately enrich events and ultimately find root cause? How many are still struggling finding the root cause of events, still on those big bridge calls, right? And the goal here is to eliminate that, right? The machine should understand previous events, previous things in the environment to make better decisions for us versus us having to go look at, as humans, go look for information, go try to correlate that information. I've seen some network engineers who have 3 big screens, right? And they've got 20 windows on each screen. And when you have an outage, they get on their conference bridge and they're staring at every screen trying to figure out the right piece of information. The machine should solve that for us. We shouldn't have to do that. Again, making work better for people. And then virtual agent technology, right? How many times do those machines have to, or how many times do people have to answer individual calls? And how does that slow down the end user experience when a person has to answer versus a machine, and a machine be able to solve that person's problem? Cognitive search. So today in ServiceNow, you probably do search and it's all done by key tags, right? You're using tags and you're trying to tag the right thing. Wouldn't it be great if you could search via natural language processing? So I can ask a question and it's going to read all the data behind it, read all the articles in my knowledge base, and actually be able to give me answers in context. Prediction. So another key capability is I don't want to not only know what happened after it happened, I don't want to be reactive, I want to be proactive. I want to be able to predict some of those outages before they actually occur and prevent them. And then finally, robotic automation. If we're really going to complete the fulfiller role as in the system of machine learning, we ultimately need robotic automation so that you can actually take action and resolve issues. Any questions on those capabilities? So if we wanted to put this all together in a slide and say, what is a system of machine learning altogether? This is a system of machine learning. There's some strategic drivers on the far left that kind of tells you exactly what, the drivers behind people adopting machine learning is. At the top, it's who benefits, right, from it. And then on the far right is some of the value that you should expect to get from the system of machine learning. And at the core of it, what is the system of machine learning? In the middle, it's the system of action, right? So really, if you wanted to explain what is the system of machine learning, what you really would say is the system of machine learning is something that accelerates your system of action via technology, right? So anything that a human does manually, right, via cross-department system of action, that can be accelerated by those 6 capabilities. That ultimately is the system of machine learning, right? How do I make that system of action work better, faster, better for humans? It's eliminating the work that's required. I was working with a customer who had a great end portal, a portal that they call IT Direct, which basically they can get all their requests in, and then they said, I'm not really getting a lot of value from the back end. My fulfillers are still running around. They're still routing things manually after we've done this transformation. And my answer to that is, well, you've only done a modernization. You haven't done a transformation yet. Transformation means I'm enabling the system of action, and more importantly, I'm enhancing it so that everything can be done automatically, or 80% of the things can be done automatically, and very few things are done manually by humans when it comes to request fulfillment. So this is kind of the journey that most customers take, right? They start with service quality and control. And when you start with service quality and control, you're starting to streamline the processes, right? So you're starting to predict things, you're starting to correlate items, you're doing some anomaly detection, basic things like that. And then when you get into transformation, you start doing task routing, automated task routing, so that you're not ping-ponging requests across the environment. And you're starting to enable virtual agents, right? So you start deflecting calls away from humans, right? When it comes to innovation in that third phase, you're starting to enable cognitive search. I'm no longer having the human find the information. The machine finds the right information at the right time. How many times have you searched in your enterprise for something only to turn to Google, your favorite Google search, to find the right answer, right? The goal is to make the end user experience work as well at home that you use Google at home, or your Google Home, say, hey, Google, and have that same experience in the enterprise. And then finally, with robotic automation, ultimately completing that fulfiller experience. So now I'm going to hand it over to Cliff to kind of share with you the story that Cisco has undergone to take on this journey?
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so as he said, we have started, I mentioned earlier, we started about 2 years ago with ServiceNow. We have our instance now up and running, and we're using it for the CMDB and incident and problem management. And I'm going to take you through a story of how we moved through that journey, how we got to where we are today, and then where we're looking to go with machine learning. I should mention that architect has a Latin root. It actually means can talk forever without breathing. So I like a more conversational approach. So if anybody has questions, raise your hand. We'll take them as we go. We'll also leave a little time at the end for anybody to ask questions there if it comes up. So again, stage one, building that foundation that we're talking about. And the problems we were facing, and you probably have slides very much like this yourselves, the problems that we were facing were that we had many systems. We had a pretty mature process ourselves, a number of systems. We had application portfolios and service portfolios and host management, and we had clouds being built and all of that. But it had evolved over time, and it was all very siloed. And we had a whole lot of integrations coming in and out between all of those. So we had a ton of tools, a lot of great data, and a billion integrations trying to tie it all together, but nobody was speaking the same language. And so when you tried to tell somebody about a particular host or a particular application, they looked at it from a completely different perspective than you did because they were pulling their data from a different system. Users, because of that siloing, were forced to swivel chair back and forth, right? I want to deal with an application, so I come over here and I put in my application, but what service does it belong to? Let me go to the service portfolio and go there, and now I'm running my service. How many hosts does it have? Let me go to host management to get a count, and you're jumping between systems and interfaces, and it was just bogging everything down. That plus that rapidly evolving system, right? When you have that spider web, that dream catcher of integrations tying everything together, and you want to go and add a new system to the mix or change something about the system, it becomes a nightmare trying to keep it up to date. Uh-oh. Yep. Tape it to my back again. There we go. All right. So the comments that we were getting, and I'm not going to drain these slides. Just so you guys know, I believe if ServiceNow is doing the same thing they have done the last couple of years, all of these slides, I think, are going to be available at the end of the sessions, like in a week or so. They'll be up on the Knowledge site. So you'll be able to see all this. I'm not going to go through and read all of this to you, but these are the kind of comments we were getting specifically from the service management side, in this case. There's not one source you can go to get all that information. I don't know where to complain. People were just suffering through the problems that they had. And so we look at the ilities at the bottom, right? Everybody calls these out, the findability. We want centralized, we want it contextual. When someone comes in and they want to create an incident, who are they? Let's go ahead and build that in. Let's give them what they're looking for before they know it, based on who they are, what their roles are, what their job is. So we want to tie all that in and to make it consistent. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that consistency in a moment. But then we also talked on the ITOM side, so that's the ITSM. When you look at the ITOM side, we were getting similar kind of complaints. I don't know where to go to get my data, right? I don't have that visibility into the dependencies, because if I want to know about applications, I go over here. I want to know services, go over there, and it was all a jumble. So again, there's the ilities, visibility. We want it centralized, automated. We talk about the automation. We'll get into that in a little bit in a moment. And we want it straightforward and consistent. Consistency is a key element that you're going to hear me talk about probably for the rest of this presentation, because that's what building that foundation gives you, and that's what's absolutely necessary before you can go on to the next step, I believe, in analytics, and we're going to see. So the target state in ITSM is to provide that consistency, to give people the answers that they're looking for more quickly than they had gotten it before. So we have the service portal. We're using ServiceNow's service portal for that. OneSearch, our internal Google-style searching for information. Virtual Assistant, using Spark, or now branded as WebEx Teams, to answer questions back and forth in a conversational mode. Okay? So that consistency that we talked about isn't necessarily consistency of one interface. It's consistency of the information they're getting back, no matter how they engage with it. Because you want people to be able to engage in a way that's best for them. And a developer is going to be sitting there and they're going to want to type an IM question and get an IM answer back. Someone else may want to go to the portal and look up and read whole text documents. So you provide that consistency while changing the interface that they can get the data through. On the ITOM side, we had much the same problem. We have the service owners and application teams and operations. They all need their own specific view of the data. App teams need to know a lot more detailed, rich information about the applications than your service owner does. And your infrastructure team needs to know a lot more about the host information than your application team does. But they all still need to be talking that same language at the bottom. They need to be talking about the same stuff so that when your DevOps for hosting has an issue and he raises it to the service owner, he's talking about a host and she's talking about a host, they're talking about the same thing. I'm just going to let that dangle now. So, a word about our deployment, so you get a sense of the scale that we're talking about. We're serving about 150,000 users. We're using automated discovery and working towards service mapping, pulling in about 25 million plus CIs. I think it's like 28 or 29 now, something like that. It's growing like a weed as we do these discoveries. And we're doing all of our data centers around the world, pretty much everything except labs. And we're starting to reach out and talk about doing it actually in our vendor sites as well, in our supply side. We have about 80 integrations, actually 80 here. I think it's more like 130 now. Integrations both in and out of the system. And when you look at that number, when I look at that number, I think, well, what the heck? I just talked about how we reduced the number of integrations. Sadly or happily, depending on how you look at it, that is a reduced number of integrations because most of those tools, most of those data analytics tools and the data providers like vCenter and NetApps and whatever else you're using to push data and to get it up into ServiceNow used to all have to interconnect and talk. So each of those 80 or 130, each one had 4 or 5 or 6 integrations itself at the time. So we've reduced that by bringing it all together into that single system, ServiceNow, to get that one taxonomy, that one set of definitions for what stuff we have and what stuff we're managing so that everybody's talking the same language. We're scaled for about 2,500 users. You can look at this. We have Click to Spark, which is now Click to Team, I suppose, with the rebranding to WebEx Teams. That's where, again, you're in the portal, you have a question. Instead of filing an incident and going into an offline process for getting your incident solved, you click a button and you get an immediate chat with a support representative right there. So all of this starts to build in. One of the things we're doing with machine learning and headed toward with machine learning is to have that actually bring up an AI to talk to, as opposed to bringing it to a direct person. So we have a little bit of both. Right now we have a conversational approach going with some of our query responses I talked about with that one search earlier. But then we also have Click to Chat, which will take you straight to a person. So everybody probably has a slide very much like this, which is sort of the slide you give your executives. Here's the big picture. Here's where we're going. And this is where we're going and much of where we already are today. So you've got the infrastructure at the bottom. You have all of your domain management, bringing that data up into ServiceNow there in the center. And we're doing monitoring through a number of different tools, App Dynamics, Science Logic, and some others. We're going to get a little bit more into the assurance side in a moment. And all of that feeds up into the support desk and incident and problem change, application portfolio inventory, service reporting, service metrics reviews, all of everybody consumes out of that space. And that's the key, again, that consistency, that they're all speaking that same language. So enough about how we got there and where we are today. Let's get into where we're looking to go. Now, this slide, everybody's probably aware of all these kinds of things too. But your business analysts and your engineers, they're responsible for gathering that data and bringing it together into one place, right? Or bringing it together so they manage the vCenter, they manage NetApps, they manage the domain management systems, the cloud management, they handle your AWS and deployments, whatever else. All of those sources of record feed up into one system where you bring it together, normalize and aggregate that data. I can't say enough that that's so important because that gets everybody, again, that consistency, talking the same language, talking about the same stuff. And that's where you can clean it, you can validate it, you can do whatever kind of tests you need on it, and it's there as sort of the dictionary for the next step. And that next step is your data analyst and your data scientist doing the analytics that we're talking about. Because if without that step, without that foundation for the data that you've got, you end up trying to do data analytics from all of that myriad of different systems that you've got. And this person over here is talking about a host, and that system over there is talking about a host, but this one is only counting operating systems running on a blade, real metal hosts. And this one's talking about all the VMs. So this one's got 1 and this one's got 100. And then what happens? Do you count Docker? Is Docker a host? You have to make that decision. You decide as you bring it into this common platform what you're going to call a server, what you're going to call a host. And of course, a lot of that comes out of the box with ServiceNow, so you leverage that system. That's why we're here. But you want to make sure that everybody starts talking that language, so then when it goes up to your executives and your service owner says, how many hosts do I have? They get the same answer that you would get if you went to DevOps and asked how many hosts belong to that service. So many times we see that that wasn't happening in the past, where everybody would have a different answer, and they'd go into service metrics reviews, or they'd go into discussions about this, and it would end up not being a discussion about the direction of the business, but being a discussion about whose data is right. So we can't have that anymore. The 4 key areas that we're looking at covering in the short term at Cisco: event correlation. I think that's probably top of mind for a lot of people. You mentioned it earlier, David. Reducing the noise and reducing mean time to resolution of issues. Right? Because with all the myriad of monitoring and assurance systems that you've got, all of them pushing data up, you've got 12 alerts. You don't want to open 12 incidents, because you know that of those 12, 7 of them are over here and 5 of them are over there. And I just had to do math in front of 200 people, but it worked, so I'm good. Now, the next one up is the natural language parsing, right? And we mentioned that as well. We went from our previous system, who shall not be named, but when people went to create an incident, they had to put in about 25 fields, and they had to know the functional area of this and the functional thing of that, and it was a mess. People actually literally gave up on putting in incidents at times because it was too complex. Now with the ServiceNow, we're down to asking 5 questions. When you come in, we know who you are. We know where you are, so we've got your location, where you're based anyway. We could find out where you are, but that's a whole other world of interest. So what we're doing then is need to find a way to route traffic better, or route the incident rather, better based on what they've put in that text blob. Because the user came in and said, I've got a problem with my laptop, it's Windows, blah, 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 blah. And we want natural language parsing to figure out where that should go. Was it a password problem that they had, a Windows password or a Mac password? So let it analyze that, learn over time how to push that data or where to put that ticket. Predictive analytics, right? The only thing better than reducing MTTR is not needing MTTR in the first place, right? So take the data that you're getting from your analytics, from your assurance rather, analyze it, and start looking at trending over time. Can you figure out when a blade's going to fail before it does, and swap that thing out? Analytics will provide that to us. The machine learning is going to provide that for us. And then, of course, self-healing systems. So when it does go out, maybe you can still beat MTTR by making it 4 seconds instead of 4 hours by self-healing. Have a system that has learned, and you've built in your Puppet scripts or your automation to know how to fix a particular problem, how to grow a table space in a database. And so your monitoring says, hey, table space got big. Automatically extend it. Make it bigger. Self-healed. Never becomes an incident. It would be if it didn't have a chance. So a word about where Cisco's going on the whole in this space. And a lot of these systems you see up here, we're integrating into our instance in Cisco IT because we are essentially customer 0 for the BU. So we're a test bed. They try their stuff out on us. So we work with them to show them sort of that real world example. AppDynamics and Perspica, of course, for application monitoring. We're using Cisco Tetration for the network, malware defense. I'm not going to read you the list, but all of this, and this is just out of Cisco, and this isn't even everything out of Cisco. It's probably 2 or 3 times as big on the big product scale. The point here isn't, hey, look how great Cisco is. The point is, that's just from us. Go down to the Vendor Expo, and there's AI products all over the place. So again, everybody's working in this space. Everybody is looking at what they can do with AI. But back to that story of consistency. If all of these different systems that I've got are talking about different things, when one says network switch, it means one thing, and another one says it's a switch, it's a different thing. Host, container, which is which? They all need to be able to have that consistency to be able to speak that same language. Over on the right-hand side, by the way, are the internal projects. I'm sure you have quite a number yourself that we're doing that are also leading into analytics. Cisco IT Ops Plus, which is we started working on that natural language processing before I actually found out it was coming from ServiceNow. So now we have a question for ourselves. Do we continue down our path or adopt the ServiceNow tools. They're doing natural language processing on incidents. Clip, which is our answer to Splunk inside because we built it, and a data analytics platform where we host all this data, again, to centralize it, to bring it together so that we have a common taxonomy and a common model to pull the data from. So the problems that we were facing, we actually, and this is, egg on our face, before we ever went to ServiceNow, we said, let's do event correlation, which is an analytic effort. And let's do AI, let's do machine learning. So we tried, rather. We ran into roadblocks. We had rudimentary monitoring data, right? So we had basically up and down. We synthetic transactions. We could do up and down. And we had other systems that were providing more richer information, but that wasn't getting consumed by that. It wasn't being tied together into a common approach. Manual rule-centric analysis, right? So the approach that we took was we were writing if statements, right? If this alert comes up, then go do this. If that alert comes up, then go do that. If I need something to do that, what's the AI for, right? Now, that said, we all have to realize that AIs are born as babies. They're born as little babies. They don't come out of the womb knowing calculus. So you have to train them. You have to give them data about what did happen and what you took as a result. And rules like this, you have to build into it. And so you will have a period of time where you're still doing it manually and you're still applying rules like this, but you're starting to use that as the training data into the machine learning so the AI can pick it up and move from there. Otherwise, your AI is just going to sit there and go, I don't know nothing. And the last is the siloed inventory systems, right? Again, I talked about that where we had all these different domains, application services here and host over there. And when you start doing monitoring, that lack of consistency, that lack of common definition, common understanding of your infrastructure was a big problem for us. Because one monitoring system said this host had a problem, this one said a host had a problem, but what this thing was calling a host wasn't a host, right? From this one's perspective. So ServiceNow is providing for us that consistent definition, that consistent metadata, if you will, of the stuff that we have and the things that we talk about. And so our movement away from that, of course, we're adopting more advanced monitoring tools, right? We have App Dynamics now, it was a Cisco acquisition, Tetration, Science Logic we're using for the infrastructure, Oracle Enterprise Manager. So, find the best tool in the best slot. For the manual rule-centric approach, of course, that was 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Systems have been coming along, and we know more now about how we should engage. So we are looking to how do we build the right training data to train these systems. Now that we have bullet 3, that common infrastructure that ServiceNow is providing, that common, not infrastructure, but that common taxonomy that we're talking about. What is the stuff that we're trying to modify? So our target architecture at a glance. Now this is a very, very simplified diagram, of course. You can't put too much on PowerPoint. But there's some all right. That's true. Hey, the architects out there, how many of you actually work on anything but PowerPoint these days, right? I mean, it's difficult. But there's a story to be told here that I think is very important. We talked there at the bottom, right? We've got discovery and the domain management, the collection information, and then that's feeding up into the CMDB, right? So you've got this myriad of system domains. And you've got vCenter and NetApps, and you've got all these management systems down there. You've got discovery pulling this data up, and they're all talking about overlapping data constantly. And that's okay, and it's necessary, right? Because you're not going to try and make something else to replace vCenter, right? You're not going to make something to replace NetApp. That's the right tool and the right job for the right place. So you bring it together to get that common taxonomy, that common data model for your CMDB. So now, when someone says server, they're all talking about the same thing. When someone says app, they're all talking about the same thing. Everybody understands the language and can look it up and see 3,842 business apps. And if you look it up, if I look it up, if he looks it up, it's all the same, exact same numbers. Now, then it breaks out again. So we do all this work to get it all together into one place, to get it all nice and neat and organized, and then we go and blast it out into about 20 different monitoring tools, right? It's necessary. It's necessary. There's no way you're ever going to find a monitoring tool that's going to do everything for everybody. So you have to have the monitoring tools, infrastructure monitoring, your synthetic transactions, if you've got the up-down stuff going, experience monitoring, you can see the list here as well as I can. All these things, there are tools that play in that space that do a much better job than any one single I do it all tool will ever do for you. And that's good. So we have that. And my next slide, by the way, goes into what tools we're using in this space, so I'll show you that in a moment. But then you've got another problem. The same problem you were facing at the very bottom. You've got a whole bunch of systems. Now, they're all talking the same metadata. They're all talking about the same stuff. But now they're reporting up, monitoring assurance information about different stuff again. So we're back to having a foundational problem. If I try to feed from all those monitoring systems up into analytics, up into event correlation, up into anything essentially that's going to consume that for runbook automations or whatever, how do they know which one of those to listen to? How do they know which one is the one that they should take? If infrastructure monitoring says the host is down, but application monitoring, because they all overlap, so applications are going to talk about host a little bit, application monitoring says the application's fine. How can that be? Or it says the host is down, but infra says it's up. Which one do you believe? So we add a layer here under AI Ops, and I can't believe I did this, but I left out the most important word in what it does, and that's normalization. It brings that data back together, and it normalizes it. It becomes the broker of truth, if you will. The broker of truth for what is up, what is down, what is the monitoring status. And it's not just up and down statuses, right? Assurance also gives you trending information. This becomes the broker of truth for all of that. So that anybody consuming data, wanting to know what the current health of a thing is, or to consuming alerts as they're happening in real time, gets that from the broker of truth. So that I can have a listener, and you can have a listener, and she can have a listener, but they're all listening to the same stream now. So when they talk about a problem, when they talk about what's up and what's down, they're talking the same language again. And that's the analytics and visualization. The business can have theirs, right? DevOps, Ops, application performance management, they can all have their own visualization of the alerts and the assurance that's coming through, but they're all getting it from that broker of truth. A word on that, by the way, I use broker of truth instead of system of truth, if only to point out that it doesn't necessarily need to be a big honking database where you're storing everything. I've got a data lake up there that shows that you've got that. But it can be a streaming event. It can be a streaming ability that's just looking at the events that come in, tying together what it can, and publishing out a cleaned set of events with noise filtering and whatever else attached. It can be a pass-through. It doesn't necessarily need to be a system with a big footprint. And then, of course, all that feeds up into the incident problem, runbook automations, and whatnot. But it's at those top two layers where you start to do those analytics, where you start to do that machine learning. Well, that, I guess, also in the AI Ops, where you are doing that event correlation as well. So you've got a correlation going on there. That may be the exact same system as that broker of truth. It may be sitting next to it. You know, that's all technical. But those analytics that I'm talking about, however, require that you be talking the same language about the stuff you have, and that all the systems consuming the data all have a shared understanding of what the state was at any given time, which is that normalization layer with the AI Ops. Two more slides, and then we'll hop into some questions. Here is the same slide, just broken out with what we're using in these spaces right now, or where we're headed in these spaces. Again, the bottom, we've got discovery. We're starting to work with service mapping, titration analytics. We've got all these systems pumping up into ServiceNow as our CMDB, running our ITOM for us. So more than just a CMDB, we're also using it for application management and service portfolio and the host management and ITOM on the whole. Then in the management space, or excuse me, the monitoring space, right, Science Logic for doing infrastructure, some of it, Stealth Watch for doing some of the network, Tetration for the network, App Dynamics for the applications. You can look at this as well. So we are already breaking out monitoring tools based on what we need, and looking then to tie it together through that broker of truth. And in our case, we're looking at possibly using Perspica. It's becoming part of App Dynamics. So App Dynamics and Prospeka sort of together, doing both assurance and analytics. But then that feeds up into the analytical platforms, which again, you see AppD there. Others as needed, Tableau up into the data lake, and being able to create incidents and whatnot, again, for ServiceNow. So ServiceNow is the foundation at the top. It's also key to us up there foundation at the bottom, key to us up there at the top. And so you can create incidents off of that event correlation straight into ServiceNow, as you've got that AI going. Then runbook automations, again, the same story, right? Maybe through event correlation, you realize what the problem is, and you say, hey, I know I've got a fix for that. I can kick off a runbook automation. I can kick off a script that's going to go and fix that combined problem. So, last slide, I promise. Cliches come from somewhere, right? I started writing these, and I realized that it was all cliche. But frankly, there's a reason they're cliches, right? Think globally and act locally. Recommendation here. Make sure you keep an eye on the big picture, that slide that we were looking at just a moment ago. It's huge. You've got this massive plan. Plan that. Expect that. Get ready for that. But if you try to go and sell that big picture to your executives, it will never work, right? You're not going to get funding for that, because very often I see people go into meetings and say, we're going to do data analytics. I need 10 people for a year. And what are you going to provide me? Interesting stuff. Right? Good data. It's like, well, I've got interesting stuff. I don't need that, right? So find a problem. Find the problem that you're going to solve. A problem. Solve it. With whatever it takes. Because frankly, I don't ever go into executive meetings or with anybody and say, I'm going to tell you about the AI we're going to use. I'm going to talk about how we're going to use machine learning. They don't care. They don't, and they shouldn't. They care about the problem. Solve the problem. Now, the best way to solve a lot of these problems is that AI and that machine learning. But talk to them about the problem, solve the immediate problems, and then you'll get those baby steps towards your solution. First things first, this is the one that we learned ourselves in our attempt at event correlation early on. You have to do the first things first. You have to gather the data so that you can analyze it. You don't have anything to analyze if it's not gathered. You have to analyze it before you can learn from it. And you have to learn from it before you can automate it. Okay? It sounds, I wrote it down, I was like, well, that's ridiculous, right? People are going to know that. But it's so true, and it stumped us, or not stumped us, but it caught us 3 years ago when we tried to do event correlation earlier. We went from gathering to automating. We skipped the whole learning part. So don't. And that's that hierarchy that you showed there earlier, that bottom up, right? Gather it, explain it, now normalize it, get that baseline, that consistent set of information. Make sure everybody's talking the same language. And then last, you can get all dressed up with no place to go. All the intelligence that you've got, all of the data, all of the analytics, and all of that is really pretty, and you can make some amazing graphs. I mean, with great respect to everybody down in the expo down there, you're going to go down there and see amazing visualization. And they're good and useful if they're talking the same language. If all that information is based on that foundation of understanding that metadata, what stuff do we have? So that when I see my application trending going up, right? And somebody else shows it going down. Why? Because what I called an application was this running system over here that's 14 JVMs. What you called an application was your entire bloody service. Right? So you're going up and I'm going down and we're not talking about the same thing. The information is going to be useless if you don't have that common foundation, that common metadata, not only of your CIs and your dependencies, but also of what events have happened through assurance. So I can't stress that one enough. And then with that, I will hand it back over to David.
All right. Thanks, Cliff. So what are the top three takeaways? Really, it's the system of machine learning helps, I can't see it, helps to identify processes and patterns across your environment. So I think the key here is, as Cliff said, right, the key is that if you use your data well and make it actionable, it really transforms what you can achieve in your environment. Number two is really standardize on the ServiceNow platform. If you choose to use another platform, which I'm guessing since you're all here, you're not choosing another platform, figure out what the challenges are that you could run into. I had a customer that first said, well, my ERP for my enterprise is SAP. So I'm going to try to standardize my capabilities on my ERP system and make it the ERP for IT. And then they figured out how much integration they had to do, how much data they had to move, how much, what are all the systems? And they realized that, nope, ServiceNow is the right platform for that. So that goes back to the enterprise architecture discussion around what is the true platform and where do they play in the ecosystem of the enterprise. And then finally, everything's about action, right? To Cliff's point, his executives care about action, right? They care about results, some kind of business result, right? You're either going to be able to lower your cost or you're going to improve your productivity. If you get really lucky, you're going to increase your revenue, right? I was working with another division within Cisco, their Cisco services organization, and they're all about selling more services to their customer, right? And it really boils down to the action that they're able to enable via the platform to make those services better for those customers, and it's real revenue to them. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, either to Cliff or myself. Does anyone have any questions? Yep.
Investing so much on AI products, is there any data point that you can share from Cisco perspective as how this has helped you to showcase your higher management about the value add on the licensing costs of these AI products?
On the licensing cost of the AI products?
Of the AI products, like you have to purchase them, right? So how are you showing the value add?
So we are, we're still in, especially with assurance, so that event correlation layer, we're getting to the point now where we are starting to look at what that's going to be, that broker of truth that I mentioned. So we have expanded our monitoring. We've got the AppD and teturation and whatnot. They have AI built into them to some degree. We are right now looking into what that layer is. So we haven't done that quite yet. But that MTTR, that is always a very difficult one, or not MTTR, but that return on investment is always a very difficult one to come up with a number with. I mean, how do you know that analytics is going to get you, that you're going to be able to reduce MTTR by 10%? Right, so we're reaching out to Gartner and some of the others to get the statistics that they've got on results from other people, just as you guys, I'm sure, are looking at the same sort of data. But we haven't been able to generate that inside. And that too is part of that difficulty in selling these technologies to the executives. Because as technologists, we know that it's going to be valuable. We know that we're going to be able to find better data and to get better results and to do this correlation that we're talking about and reduce it. But can I go up to my VP and say, you're spending, $10 million on support right now. Next year, it's going to be $9 million because of me. I can't promise that right now. How do I get to that number? So the best you can do is look at the industry trends and talk to Gartner and whatnot until you start seeing it. That's why I suggested going out there in baby steps, right? If you're talking about licensing a product, don't license the product for the entire organization, the $14 billion plan, right? Find a way to get started small with that set of capabilities. Show its value, and that will in turn help to build out the footprint, if you will, or help you justify it. Yes?
How many data scientists do you have in your team, and do you have any details you can share as far as the models they built to process data? ETL?
We've got probably 3 focused people on the data side. 2 of them probably more trained data scientists and then database people as well on this specific team. Now, in our organization as a whole, under IT, we have entire organizations focused on that particular area. But for what I was showing you there, we have about 3 focused people on the data itself. I don't have any slides here, but they'll come up after. I'll give you my card. Maybe we can get together and I can talk you through what we've been doing. That goes for anybody, by the way. I'm constantly talking to other customers. I think it's really helpful to have sessions like this, and that's why I appreciate ServiceNow doing this, because it gives us a chance to you to hear from me and for me to hear from you on what you've been doing and whatnot. I have these sessions as well. We do one-offs with other companies over time. So if you'd be interested, I'm happy to trade cards and maybe we can get together and talk more about the details.
Yep.
Specifically on, when you say customer-generated events or customer-impacting events? So when is a system going down?
Predicting the customer impacting event. I mean, many people I know, they have customer impacting events in ServiceNow clearly. I see fewer examples of events that are not customer impacting, but imply you might be heading towards one.
Right.
Actually being detected and acted on within ServiceNow.
Yeah, that is the holy grail of a lot of this. I agree. That's, again, that analytics layer that we were talking about. We were building out a data lake for that. Yeah. We're looking at the event correlation tools to help us do that analysis. We don't have that in place right now. So I can't say, I use this tool and here's how I go and do it. Yeah. But that foundation that we're building, both of the analytics, both of the CIs and of the assurance, to bring that together, it becomes the part of the training data. I mean, that's the language of the training data. And then the training data itself, of course, becomes that trending over time as you start to measure it and you look at it after time. So I foresee once we get this data up into that system, we're collecting all of these analytics in that data lake, that it would take about 6 to 8 months, I think is the estimate that we're looking at, of watching the system and collecting this trending data and looking at what incidents happen, what alerts have happened before we have enough solid training data to really then be able to have those predictive analytics going. Because that is, I'm sure you're aware, that is sort of the best solution and the best way to avoid problems, because it's the only way to avoid problems.
Yeah, I have a customer example with Honeywell, and what they've done is it's totally non-IT, for their IoT environment, they have, in the manufacturing of chips, right? So in the manufacturing of chips, one of the things they do is they have to seal each motherboard. And when they do that, there's this thing called a sputtering platter, which is basically a thick piece of metal that gets shot at by a laser that creates some particles that then seals that. And that sputtering platter is much like a tire on a car. It wears out, right? And they've started to use analytics on top of with sensors and machine learning to identify when that sputtering platter is going to wear out so that they can replace it before it happens. And they've started doing that, and that's fairly new. I know it's completely non-IT, but that's one example where I've seen it actually work, where they've started to correlate the sensor data from the sputtering platter to predict and replace that item before it actually fails. Does that kind of answer your question?
In a way, but is any of that being done in ServiceNow?
Yes, the whole thing's being done in ServiceNow.
So they must be taking some parameter rather into the ServiceNow platform and then monitoring.
Yeah, what they've done is they have a platform, you might have heard it from them, is called Sentient, which is their IoT data lake. So it's all their data lake capabilities. What they're challenged with is their data lake is not actionable. It's truly a data lake. So all the analytics and all the actual action of correlating and actually triggering activity to go replace that sputtering platter is done in ServiceNow. Any questions? Yeah. One.
So you mentioned about data consistency, right? Because that's the part that's making it work all together. So did you solve it at the broker of truth layer, or where did you actually solve that?
A couple of places. Basically those two long horizontals are where we're solving that. So for the CMDB, for the CIs and dependencies and whatnot, that's getting solved inside of ServiceNow CMDB. Because we're bringing it together, and that's where it's all co-located. All of it, we do our normalization, reconciliation, tying all that data together right there. So from that point up, for the rest of the stack, everybody who wants to talk about an app knows what it is, because that's what we call it right here in the CMDB. So for CIs, it's at that layer. For the assurance data, for the monitoring data, of course, that doesn't exist at that point. So we have that other layer, and that's where we normalize that. And then the data lake would bring those two together. So up here in that layer, those monitoring systems are talking about that normalized, consistent definition of stuff. And now we're normalizing the monitored events. We're the trending data about that. So 3 systems told me that host number 52689 is down, right? Or 2 of them said down, 1 of them said up. Which one do I believe? How do I represent that as a single statement of truth to to consumers outside the space. So you're really normalizing at two layers.
All right, that's all the time we have. So thanks everyone for attending. If you guys have questions, feel free to come up and we'll answer them.
Yep, great.